The chalice and its flame represent many things to us. It represents our identity. It represents our commitment to our values. It also lights our gathering in the sacred space of worship. I will light a candle to represent the flaming chalice with these words by Lois Van Leer. We light this chalice on the brink of a new year, letting go of what has been, open and hopeful for what may come, renewed, restored, ready to live life anew. May we move forward with intention. And with a match, our chalice. Well, I would like to welcome you this morning. Good morning. I'm Mark Simpson and worship leader for today's service. The Reverend Dr. Emily Melcher is serving our congregation and is in the pulpit twice a month, next on January 9th. In fact, she will be sharing the pulpit with Reverend Tom Bozeman from the Evergreen Unitarian Universalist Fellowship in Marysville. So, yes, welcome. Welcome to our service and to the new year. A new year seems like new clothes. A bit stiff at first, but wearing them is a chance to show your best side to the world. If you are the type of person who makes New Year's resolutions, you likely have made them by now. Perhaps they are posted on your refrigerator. If you're like me, however, you feel it's the right thing to do, although you haven't done it yet. This month's worship theme is living with intention. When I hear the phrase living with intention, I hear a call to action, a summons to set serious goals or update my to-do list. I'm learning that's a pretty narrow understanding of intention. I've learned that an intention with a capital I is not an item on a to-do list. It's not about setting goals for the new year, at least in the usual sense. Not that any of those things are bad. We need goals and resolutions. So what does living with intention mean? That's the theme for this month's services. Today's service begins at the beginning by taking a fresh look at New Year's resolutions and the promises of a new year. As for intentions, I'll leave you with this quotation from Lao Tzu. At the center of your being, you have the answer. You know who you are, and you know what you want. One announcement before we continue. On the next two Sundays, we're joining with the Evergreen UU Fellowship in Marysville to create services together. Next Sunday on January 9th, we'll start at 10 a.m., which is Evergreen UUF's usual starting time. And then the following Sunday, we'll be back to our regular schedule. On the 16th, we'll be meeting at 10 a.m. So 10:30, excuse me, on January 9th, 10 o'clock on the 16th. So check your the website, our website, and the e-news for details about those services for the next 2 weeks. I want to thank Mavis Kaufman and Sarah Richards for their technical help today. They're part of our technical team, just two of a handful of folks who make all of this possible. It's really a gift to us, and I am grateful. Thank you. Speaking of making services, I'd like to welcome Joseph Bednarik back to our congregation today. Joseph speaks often at other UU congregations in the area. Fortunately, we are on his list. He is also an author, editor, co-publisher of Copper Canyon Press, which is one of the publishing some of the finest poetry today in America. The title of his talk today is The Newest First Day. And now, please join me in our affirmation. I believe the words will be on your screen. Love is the spirit of this congregation, and service is its practice. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek truth and love, and to help one another. You have contributed your time and talents to support this congregation and our larger community as well. We are grateful for those contributions because we are self-supporting. We also depend on your monetary support. This morning is an opportunity to give something to the vitality and activities of this congregation. It's not about how much we give, it's simply important to make a gift. So I'm passing the virtual collection basket today. You can donate online by going to our website and clicking on the donate button, as you can see on your screen, or mail us a check, please. And thank you for your gift.
Hello and Happy New Year. It's relevant every day because we're always making a revolution, right? Always coming around the sun, and always have the opportunity to start fresh, start new. We have been weighed down by sadness like a stone. We have yearned, we have yearned. We have sometimes felt so utterly alone. While we turn, we've been stricken by the wonder of it all. Stricken down, stricken dumb. We have sometimes felt so faint we want to fall. Overcome, but all in all, I'd say this year at Flight Together was quite a run. What say we make one more circle, one more circle, one more circle around the sun. We have raised our fists in anger and we've tried to work it out, that we need each other, we cannot deny. There is no doubt, there is no doubt. So let us weave another dream in outer space while we're turning, on this planet home that holds our human race. Still we're learning, but all in all, I'd say this year at Flight Together's been a real wild one. Let's say we make one more circle, one more circle, one more circle around the sun.
Whether you've made New Year's resolutions or plan to or want to ignore the idea altogether, you have hopes for this year. A hope isn't a resolution. I think it's more like a wish or a dream that could possibly be made real. Part anticipation, part expectation, and part uncertainty. Maybe you haven't articulated them yet because they just haven't bubbled up from your subconscious. Now is the time. Naming your hopes is the first step in realizing them. This is your chance. As you feel moved, type one hope into the chat window. A hope that's meaningful to you, personally, big or small, world peace or new friendship, a loved one's recovery from an illness. Please try to summarize your hope in one or two words, and don't hesitate to send a hope someone else has already named. I'll read them as you type. As you type, you will make an artful beginning to the new year by helping create a word cloud diagram of possibilities. You'll see your hopes appear before you. Please make sure to reply all as you type. Food security. Finds her feet. Conservation. Housing. Flow. Good health. Hope for those willing to look up and act. So act accordingly. Love and acceptance. To recover. Be a healing presence. Healthy orcas, crusty white bread. Contentment. To restore. Vulnerability. End wars. Healthy relationships. Charity. To renew. World peace. Camille's return. Acceptance. Music. Acceptance. Justice and compassion. Healing for my granddaughter. World peace. Friendship. More compassion. Connections. Climate change. Human wakefulness. Green commitments. There. One more. Universal empathy. Ride bicycle. Peace and justice. Awoke. Which is a good place, I think, maybe to end. Thank you for your contributions. You can see here by just looking at the screen that there is hope for the new year. Your hopes have been heard and honored in this community. Thank you. Thank you.
That was a very, very gorgeous exercise, and I want to live in the world of your resolutions and intentions and hopes. That's just a fantastic place to be. We're going to begin the sermon actually with a reading by a Norwegian poet named Rolf Jacobsen. Jacobsen lived near the Arctic Circle, so he knew something about cold, he knew something about darkness. He wrote this beautiful poem called Just Delicate Needles about light, and it's one of my favorite winter poems. And it's appropriate that it also ends with the word hope. It's so delicate, the light, and there's so little of it. The dark is huge. Just delicate needles, the light in an endless night. And it has such a long way to go through such desolate space. So let's be gentle with it, cherish it, so it will come again in the morning. We hope. And I love that last line, the we hope. And I always try to think about what the tenor and what the hope is in that hope. That's one of the reasons I love this poem. And so, good morning, happy holidays, happy New Year. As this is the first Sunday of the new year, we're going to be talking about the New Year generally, and specifically, even though New Year's Day is already old news, for those billions of people on the planet who use the Gregorian calendar, New Year's Eve and New Year's Day, they're arguably the most secular, time-sensitive, self-reflective, yin-yang holidays imaginable. It is pure out with the old and in with the new, where there's very little or no religious or spiritual backspin, though it's ripe with opportunities to celebrate the year's accomplishments, to reflect on behaviors, good, bad, and changeable, and to begin sentences with little pep talks for yourself, like, okay, all right, this year we ... and then we fill in the blank with whatever tickles your fancy: exercise more, talk less, listen closer, clean the junk drawer, etc., etc., etc. Even the word January is in honor of Janus, the Roman god of doors, gates, beginnings, and transitions. And Janus is represented artistically by having two opposite faces, one that looks forward, one that looks behind, one that looks to the future, one that looks to the past. And while I'm a big fan of someone is not on mute, so if we can make sure that everyone's on mute, that would be great. I'm just hearing some feedback. And while I'm a big fan of masks and doorways, of gates and beginnings and reflection and planning, I actually have to admit at the outset that I am not a huge fan of New Year's per se. For me, it's like watching the odometer turn every 999 miles, assuming that your odometer can still turn. My most memorable, or maybe not so memorable, New Year's celebrations took place in that incredible 5-year growth spurt for me from ages 17 through 21, when my friends and I unwittingly explored in 2 provocative proverbs from hell from William Blake. The first proverb is, you never know what is enough unless you know what is more than enough. And the second proverb that we explored was, the road to excess leads to the palace of wisdom. And I can attest that I certainly know what more than enough tequila is. And one arguably more mature New Year's party I attended involved this activity, which was fantastic, which was to write a letter to your future self, to seal it in a self-addressed stamped envelope and toss it into this pretty basket that was left by the door as you left the party. Now, at the end of the party, the host collected all the letters. She filed them away in a drawer, and then 9 months later, she dropped them into the mail. And of course, the trick in this is that you completely forget about the letter that you wrote yourself, and that your New Year's Eve self essentially says hello to your September self. And this is particularly poetic timing, because count it up, it's 9 months, which is what time it takes for a fertilized egg to become a human being, a miraculous 9 months of growth and transformation, which we all here accomplished beautifully so many years ago. So one day I found this letter in my mailbox addressed to Joseph Bednarik in my own handwriting. And when I opened the envelope, I discovered a single sheet of white paper, which I had totally forgotten about, with questions that I had for myself. And I had put these little check boxes beside each question so I could take the questionnaire for myself. The letter was less than 100 words long, and I will read it in its entirety. It started out pretty positive. So, hey, handsome. So it's always good to get your attention in that way. Here's a little questionnaire for you. I'm happy. I kiss my wife daily. I tell my children they're amazing. I've eaten tacos within the last month. I cried at a movie last week. I wrote this symbol recently, which is one of my favorite symbols, and it's how I sign off all my letters, little heart with radiating lines. 17 times 4 still equals 68. Listen deeper. And I am pleased to say that my September self scored pretty high on that quiz devised by my New Year's Eve self. And I was actually tickled by the compassion that I showed for myself, including a softball question like 17 times 4 still equals 68. Because if I had had a horrible year, I was bound to get at least one question in the plus column. I was essentially taking some shelter in mathematical certainty. And this is called a handhold, very much like the annual handhold of the calendar changing years, and the very public and very deeply private opportunity to reset, to start again on a new day one, the first day of the new year. Or as that piece of recovery wisdom so wisely reminds us, quote, today is the first day of the rest of your life. And so on the first day of the new year, on the first day of the rest of your life, with the party definitively over, you're sitting with yourself with pencil and paper in hand, ready to write down resolutions, promises, hopes, personal goals for the new year. And as you sit there, staring at the white paper, the paper that is so filled with potential, on the first morning of the month named after Janus, you remember two famous pieces of wisdom. First, a line from a poem by Rainer Maria Rilke, and second, a piece of homespun wisdom. From Rilke, here's his conclusion to one of his most beloved poems called Archaic Torso of Apollo. You must change your life. And the folk wisdom, which is on a little sign that I keep in my office, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And this is actually the way that I have it hung in my office. And this year, I did resolve to actually list my resolutions in writing. As psychologists and business consultants and self-help gurus, they all point out that the physical act of writing down goals or resolutions is a key to success. Now, studies show that when a person or an organization in a visioning meeting or a strategic planning session, when they articulate goals and write them down, the likelihood of reaching that goal or following through on that resolution is increased significantly. Now, research just bears this out. And I have a writer friend who years and years ago set a goal in writing to read all the poems of Rainer Maria Rilke in chronological order in multiple translations, because he doesn't speak foreign language. And so for the past 4 decades, he has never stopped reading Rilke. And he estimates that he has read the complete works of Rilke, the poems, dozens and dozens of times, very much like continuously painting the Golden Gate Bridge. And my friend is also mildly dyslexic, so reading is slow and intentional for him. So to get this done is quite the feat. And in preparation for this sermon, I actually emailed him that I was going to integrate Rilke's archaic torso of Apollo, and I asked him, who's read the line so many times, what that line, "you must change your life," meant to him. And I have to read you his answer because I find it so beautiful. Here are the words of poet Dan Gerber. The immediate thought that comes to mind is that our lives will inevitably change every day, whether or not we remain aware of the changes and whether or not we resist them. Resisting them fosters fear and finally amounts to resisting life. How much better to acknowledge the changes and then to embrace them. Change is a synonym for life. When the changes stop, we are left with decay, which is also a kind of change. Close quote. Now, I just love how Gerber is so generous with his reading of that line, because when I first considered the line, "you must change your life," I actually read it as this intense piece of instruction with the emphasis on you, the you being bound to a cluster of personal shortcomings that I needed to change because whatever I was doing wasn't good enough, didn't get there, wherever there was. And Gerber reminded me that change is the constant. That's what we're beautifully bound to. And resistance to change is not only unhealthy, it's essentially impossible. And that the emphasis is on the word must. So Gerber continues, quote, "The truth is," he's talking about his own interpretation again. "The truth is, it isn't the startling ending of archaic torso which resonates with me, but rather the awareness, the seeing that the poem evokes." And so what he's doing here, of course, is backing into the poem from that startling last line. So at this point, I'm going to provide context for everyone for that final famous line, and I'm going to share with you the entire poem. And before we do, a few kind of centering facts. Rilke worked briefly as a secretary for the famous French sculptor Rodin, who advised the poet to closely observe the world around him. And this poem comes from that practice of seeing. It is helpful to imagine the young Rilke standing in the Louvre Museum studying this ancient statue of Apollo, who is the god of light, of poetry and music. It's an ancient statue that happened to be missing its head. Archaic Torso of Apollo by Rainer Maria Rilke, translated by Stephen Mitchell. We cannot know his legendary head with eyes like ripening fruit, and yet his torso is still suffused with brilliance from inside, like a lamp in which his gaze, now turned to low, gleams in all its power. Otherwise, the curved breast could not dazzle you so, nor could a smile run through the placid hips and thighs to that dark center where procreation flared. Otherwise, this stone would seem defaced beneath the translucent cascade of the shoulders and would not glisten like a wild beast's fur, would not, from all the borders of itself, burst like a star. For here there is no place that does not see you. You must change your life. That's why Rilke's the best. And it is quite startling and remarkable how Rilke makes this headless statue come alive with light and sight imagery. And I'm actually particularly drawn to that phrase, glisten like a wild beast's fur, because I love to see things glisten in the world, that healthy glisten. So the poet stands before the statue, this artist with words encountering an art object made of stone, and the poet practices seeing. The statue's headless. The statue has confronted the ravages of time. The statue is 1,000 years from being intact, and yet the power of the art radiates from the core. The archaic torso of the sun god, Apollo, the god of light, the god of song, the god of music. Listen to the words that Rilke uses. Radiates suffuses, glistens, bursts, dazzles, flares, and gleams. And most compellingly, engaging this sculpture, the poet writes, all the borders of itself burst like a star, for here there is no place that does not see you. What an amazing turn that is from becoming the person who sees to the seen. The profound art within Apollo sees you. And actually, that line is a double negative, for here there is no place that does not see you. Now, to return to Gerber's commentary, quote, Rilke might have concluded that last line with, you must forget yourself, end quote, which to me implies that the seeing, that the engagement is happening on such a profound level that a discrete ego dissolves and that we can become like the headless torso of Apollo, that we can be glistening, radiating, suffusing, bursting, dazzling, flaring, gleaming, that we can see our own divinity. Now, getting emails like this is one of the reasons why it is fruitful to cultivate friendships and relationships and conversations with poets and artists, because they can engage the world, the changing world, in deep and curious and interlinking ways. And they also can have the temerity to suggest different closing lines for famous poems. The famous poem and the famous line has become renowned. They can actually suggest a different one, which is, to me, amazing. And here's a case in point just about the practice of seeing and why engagement with poets and artists is such a rich engagement. I talked with this poet recently, and she told me about her daily practice of keeping an observation log. So each day she notices and recollects and writes down a keenly described detail of the world. There's no thought, there's no layered meaning. She just practices seeing and describing to keep her senses engaged with the world. How the frost melts in a circular pattern on the hood of the car as the engine warms. Very mundane and yet miraculous. How the cat wraps her tail when she eats her kibbles out of a stainless steel bowl. Now, I realized that this practice broadens the world and keeps the tools of observation and engagement sharp, so that when we do stand before Apollo, whatever Apollo we happen to stand before, whether it is a giant cedar tree or a lichen-covered boulder, a blooming lilac, a dead salmon along a riverbank, a body in a casket, or the supple freshness of a newborn, we can be prepared to see and to be seen. And so to close this sermon and to open our hearts and our minds to the possibilities and the opportunities of this new year that happens to bridge the third pandemic year. It's a very important new year. Two quotes from the English author and critic John Ruskin. First, dream lofty dreams, and as you dream, so shall you become. And the second quote, the greatest thing a human soul ever does in this world is to see something and to tell what they saw in a plain way. Hundreds of people can talk for one who can think, but thousands can think for one who can see. To see clearly is poetry, prophecy, and religion all in one. So as we attend to our Janus masks in the early days of a new year, you are invited to take your dreams, your resolutions and your goals, your hopes, your becoming, and your practice of seeing into life and into the world. You are invited to stand before your own versions of the archaic torso of Apollo and see, be seen, forget yourself, and change your life. And while it is productive to promise ourselves to lose 5 pounds or to clean the garage, it is quite another to resolve to practice seeing with our eyes to practice seeing with our heads, to practice seeing with our hearts, and to see with such intention that we ourselves radiate the divine, and despite the so-called ravages of time, that we gleam, that we dazzle, we flare, and we glisten. And I wish you especially a radiating heart, because more than anything, this world needs the loving brilliance of your radiating heart. Happy New Year. Amen.
Wake now my senses and hear the earth call. Feel the deep power of being in awe. Keep with the web of creation your vow. Giving, receiving as love shows us how. Wake now my reason, reach out to the new. Join with each pilgrim who quests for the true. Honor the beauty and wisdom of time. Suffer thy limit and praise the sublime. Wake now compassion, give heed to the cry. Voices of suffering fill the wide sky. Take as your neighbor both stranger and friend, praying and striving their hardship to end. Wake now my conscience, with justice thy guide. Join with all people whose rights are denied. Take not for granted a privileged place. God's love embraces the whole human race. Wake now my vision of ministry clear. Brighten my pathway with radiance here. Mingle my calling with all who will share. Work toward a planet transformed by our care.
There is so much to be done. And there is so much we want to do. As we go forward, let us reflect on this advice from Richard Gilbert. May we learn to separate that which matters most and that which matters least of all. May we be at peace with what we can be and do. Now I will extinguish our chalice with these words from Amy Zucker Morgenstern. A candle in a lantern burns against a dark set of window panes. Never has it been more true than now. We extinguish this flame, but the sparks within us remain alight. From each of us in our supposed solitude, the signals buzz and hum, sparking through space to one another, connecting us invisibly. We are one, and from every window our light shines.